thanks. Am I good?
Yeah, you're good. You're live.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jean Crescenzo. I am the facility director at Conewago Place in Hummelstown. Today, I'd like to talk to you about self-care and setting boundaries with your loved ones who may be experiencing active addiction or relapse. Specifically, I'll be focusing on how to identify and manage emotional manipulation while still supporting your loved ones. Sometimes an individual in active addiction or in the process of relapse will use emotional manipulation tactics in order to guilt family and friends into helping them gain access to the substances that are calling to them. This may mean asking for money, for support to leave treatment early, or to provide a home plan, to name a few. We will talk about the disease of addiction and what it might look like if your loved one is in the throes of active addiction or relapse. We will also discuss how to recognize common manipulation tactics, myths and truths about what help looks like, ways to set boundaries, and discuss some self-care tips. And finally, I'll share some resources for where to go if you need help. The Mayo Clinic defines addiction, which is also called a substance use disorder, as a disease that affects a person's brain and behavior and leads to an inability to control the use of a legal or illegal drug or medicine. Substances such as alcohol, marijuana, and nicotine also are considered drugs. When you are addicted, you may continue using the drug despite the harm that it causes. Substance use disorder is also sometimes called a disease of choice, meaning that if a person never picks up, they would never become addicted. It is important to note that substance use disorder is not a moral failing, a lack of willpower, or a willful attempt to do wrong. In actuality, substance use disorder has been medically identified as a brain disorder with many identified contributing risk factors that may lead a person to addiction. These include biology or genetics. Risk factors for developing an addiction is 40 to 60% higher in an individual with a genetic predisposition. Family history or environment. If a person sees their family using, they may believe that it's normal and acceptable. Experimentation or peer pressure. If your friends are using drugs, you're 5 times more likely to use drugs as well. 70% of teens start using drugs or alcohol because their friends do. 21% of teens who have used an illicit drug at least once did so because of peer pressure. 55% of teens who tried drugs cited peer pressure as a motivating factor for their substance use. Prescriptions. We are all familiar with the opioid epidemic caused by overprescribing medications that were believed to be non-addictive, which we now know is not true. Stimulant use. Stimulants are used to treat ADHD, and they can be abused by those not needing them to increase concentration. This is seen in college-age adults to help them study and to stay up for longer periods of time. Prescribed stimulant use can also lead to using methamphetamines if ADHD is uncontrolled or undiagnosed. And then, of course, mental illness. Undiagnosed or uncontrolled mental illness may lead to addiction as a person attempts to alleviate symptoms by self-medicating. To better understand how addiction takes over a person, it is important to understand how the brain works. From a brief scientific viewpoint, our brain's job is to keep us, itself, alive and well and working at peak performance. This is called homeostasis. The brain does this by using positive and negative feedback. Think of it as cause and effect. If there's a problem, it gets identified and the brain and body uses whatever resources it can find to correct it, and it puts us back to rights. Some things that the brain regulates are breathing, temperature, sugar levels, blood pressure, hunger, sleep, etc. It uses all sorts of resources to do so. For example, when we exercise or otherwise get too hot, we sweat to cool us off. We get tired in order to help regulate our sleep cycles, and our brain identifies when we should eat or drink as well as what we should eat or drink. For example, have you ever had a craving for sugar? This could be your brain telling your body that your blood sugar is low. You get the picture. When the brain believes that something is needed to achieve the goal of being okay, it becomes very persistent in gaining that thing. It's important to understand that what homeostasis is and how it works, because the Cleveland Clinic tells us that every disease that affects your body involves a disruption of homeostasis. So when we talk about the disease of addiction, this means that when the brain becomes altered by an illicit substance and it discovers that it feels good, it begins to believe that the substance is needed in order for it to remain okay or to regain homeostasis. Homeostasis is a powerful motivator when we know it, whether we know it, recognize it, or even understand it. Drugs of abuse, as these substances are also called, overpower our brains and our logic, if you want to think of it that way. We've all been told that drugs are bad. Not using in the first place would be the best option, of course, but it doesn't change the fact that some people do and that some people have risk factors that may lead to addiction. Not everyone who uses or abuses a substance will become addicted. About 25% do. Unfortunately, it's not a matter of simply knowing better. It often becomes a loss of choice after the fact. Which brings us to understanding that addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful. This concept is integral to being able to understand that what your loved one is experiencing when they're in the midst of their active addiction or relapse. Alcoholics Anonymous is actually who coined these terms. They say it's cunning because it's deceptive and manipulative. Addiction lies to the individual, making them believe that they don't have a problem. It makes excuses as to why they need to use or use more than they had anticipated. It is baffling even when we know it's wrong, because even when we know it's wrong or understand that it is harmful, we may still use. And it's powerful because the person is literally fighting against their own brain, which has been taken over by something stronger than they may be. Think of times when you talk to yourself, because sometimes we need expert opinions, right? We tell ourselves, okay, it's time to get up, we got to go to work, or it's getting late, I should probably go to bed, or you know what, I know darn right well I should not be eating that extra slice of cake. That discussion is in your own voice. It is you trying to convince yourself what you should or should not be doing, and then you deciding whether or not to listen to yourself and to take your own advice. Sounds complicated, doesn't it? But now replace, I have to go to work with, I can call out tomorrow, I have PTO. Or I hate that job anyway, I don't even care if they fire me. Or even further, I can have another slice of cake. Replace I can have another slice of cake with, I'll just have one more drink. I can do one more line, and it's just one more pill. So it may sound far-fetched to make that leap, but it really isn't. So imagine that the person has all that going on inside of their brain. I need to use this drug or drink to feel better. But then at some point, something causes them to start to question their drinking or substance use. Maybe they get to the point where they're recognizing that their brain is lying to them. Maybe the lifestyle that goes with the active addiction has become so much that they're forced to see that it is hurting them and decide that they want to change. In the treatment world, there is a theory or a model called the stages of change. This model basically describes the steps people go through to recognize and change problem behavior and progress towards sustained change. In substance use treatment, we use this model to help people identify where they are in that process and help motivate them to enact the changes that they want. The stages or steps are called pre-contemplation, which means, basically I don't have a problem. We typically consider this to be denial. Contemplation, maybe I have a problem, but I'm not really ready to do anything about it. Preparation, I have a problem and I'm going to think about ways to move towards change. Action, I worked out some ways to fix this and I'm doing the work to achieve permanent change. And then maintenance, I have a really good hold on what I need to do. I'm putting the work in and I'm on track to continue in this new way. Once change begins, folks can and often do move back and forth between preparation and maintenance. Typically, you don't go back to pre-contemplation. Change is not a clean process. It's complicated and it's hard and it takes a lot of work and a lot of help. And when things go off the rails, it can lead to relapse. This is when we slip back into old habits and patterns. Relapse itself is its own complicated process. People typically think that relapse is simply a return to using. This couldn't be further from the truth. There are actually several stages of relapse, which most people fail to recognize and what most often causes the return to use. The first sign of relapse are emotional changes. Your loved one may begin isolating from you or others. They may be experiencing mood swings. This could be due to internal struggle. Maybe they're feeling that they want to use and they're really struggling with it. Sleeping or eating habits may change, either not enough or too much of either. They may start keeping their emotions to themselves. They avoid sharing at meetings or not attending meetings at all. They can get defensive if someone notices a change in their behaviors. They can stop taking care of themselves or their hygiene. And a big red flag to an emotional relapse is not asking for help. This could very well be from shame or having feelings of wanting to use and just not wanting other people to know about it. This then progresses to a mental relapse. This is where people will start to have strong cravings. They may be thinking about people and places that they associate their substance use with. They might start spending time with people or friends that are currently using. They romanticize the drug or alcohol use. This, again, is another huge red flag that the addiction is starting to take over. They convince themselves that they can control their use and begin bargaining with themselves, giving themselves permission, to use just a little bit or in certain situations, such as during a holiday or to celebrate something. Finally, they may actively begin looking for relapse opportunities. Oh, I had a really bad day today. I got some terrible news. The anniversary of so-and-so's death is coming. I just need to take the edge off, those sorts of things. At this point, physical relapse is likely without intervention. This is the relapse that most people are familiar with. The individual may begin to lie or engage in suspicious activities. They may appear hungover or intoxicated. Their coordination or cognitive functioning might be off. They start neglecting their appearance. You may even see them go through withdrawal if they're not able to obtain more of the drugs, or completely withdraw from loved ones to avoid questions. You may begin to find empty pill bottles or other paraphernalia laying around. At this point, active addiction has returned, and it is possible to stop it from getting worse, but it is more difficult once they do start using again. So as we saw, there's several ways that addiction calls to a person. When that happens, the brain is back into survival mode and it needs to find a way to get what it needs to rebalance that homeostasis. Without knowing better, to the loved ones, relapse and addiction may present as manipulation, which it is, but the cause is more complex than just someone trying to be a jerk. Examples of manipulation tactics are below. You may have your own personal versions of these examples. One, they may start asking for money. No matter what the substance, addiction is expensive. A person struggling with addiction will keep spending more and more to obtain drugs or alcohol at the expense of other financial obligations. Asking for money or other favors is a hallmark of manipulation, and they don't generally state what the money is going to their addiction. Instead, they may say that they're facing an unexpected bill. They just need a little bit of help with rent. This is a tactic to try and stop you from asking further questions. Two, they may begin causing fights. Causing fights on purpose is typical addiction behavior in relationships. The person may start a fight to distract from a pressing discussion about their addiction. If you're busy fending off emotional attacks, you aren't really able to address the root problem of the substance abuse. And it may also be some time before you feel confident enough to bring the subject up again. Isolation and self-harm. When they don't get what they want, they may attempt to punish you by hurting themselves. They may withdraw contact, isolating themselves and leaving you to wonder how they're doing. They may even actively self-harm through actions like purposely going on a bender, drinking and driving, or refusing to eat. And in extreme cases, self-harm may manifest in actions like cutting. Guilt tripping. Someone with an addiction will almost always blame everyone but themselves for their situation. You will have to contend with statements that imply or state outright that you are at least partially responsible for the person's addiction and their manipulative behavior. When the implication is subtle or the person flat out says it, the sentiment you will hear is, "Look what you made me do." Being overly nice. The cycle of addictive behavior pattern usually contains a period where the addicted individual gives the appearance of changing for the better. They may suddenly seem contrite or sorry and genuinely remorseful, when in reality, this is just another tactic to keep you emotionally vulnerable and off guard. And finally, shifting the blame. Another example of drug addiction manipulation is a tendency to continually shift the blame away from themselves. They seemingly never take responsibility for their actions and will always find a way to blame anyone or anything other than themselves. In their mind, addiction isn't their fault. Instead, it becomes the fault of family members who didn't love them, or a stressful job, or the phase of the moon, anything to keep them from taking the responsibility themselves. Your experience with your loved one and their particular brand of manipulation may be different, but there are some common themes that you can look for. The person is given to frequent exaggerations in black and white language like always or never when describing themselves or others. You always treat my brother or sister better than me. The person knowingly pushes your buttons, preying on your emotional, physical, or monetary fears. If I don't get the money, I'm going to be in so much trouble. The person frequently alludes to their importance in your life or tries to assert their power over you in the relationship. I'm your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife. Can't you just... The person steamrolls you during conversations, not giving you enough time to think and respond. Look, I have this problem. I really need your help. I'll never ask you again. If I do, you can hang up on me. You can lock the door, whatever. The person is only kind and attentive when they want something from you. Hey, I got you flowers. I washed the dishes. I vacuumed. I washed your car, leaving the opening for just, and I just need, XYZ. The interaction leaves you feeling used, confused, bullied, or guilty. You give in, but you feel wrong about it every time. They may remind you of your own failures and focus on those instead of being introspective. You're not perfect. You were a kid once. You failed at XYZ. Why are you ragging on me? The person may bounce from family member to family member asking for favors, especially if they're told no. This is pretty self-explanatory. It's the classic, if dad says no, ask mom. They may do nice things for you, give you a ride, buy you lunch, etc. Try and prove that they've changed, which, again, is similar to above. See, everything's all great. I just need help. And ultimately, the person will not take responsibility for their behaviors. Instead, they choose to blame their lifestyle, other people, or anything other than themselves. Again, it's self-explanatory. It's not my fault. So what are you supposed to do? Society has many opinions about how to deal with somebody in relapse mode or active addiction. Here are some 4 common myths and the related truth about supporting a loved one in active addiction. Myth 1, family is responsible for causing or perpetuating addiction. The truth is, data consistently shows that positive family support leads to better outcomes for those in addiction. Myth 2, compassionate support is enabling. Tough love comes from close family and friends is the only way someone can truly enter recovery. The truth is, compassionate support is often labeled codependent. The most damaging language around addiction support describe concepts like codependency and tough love that encourage isolating the person using the substances. It spreads the idea that caring for family rewards self-destructive behavior. It makes kindness and compassion, these things that we know create positive change, feel wrong. This is not to say that codependency doesn't exist, just that it may not be what is occurring now. The term rock bottom is also an extremely troubling term. It encourages uninformed loved ones to stay distant, which can further increase the risk of overdose or death. Myth 3, families is that support can look different from family to family. It's important for family members to support their loved ones in the ways that they can. Not every family member can supervise their loved one's substance use in their home, although some do. Many family members carry naloxone and have reversed overdoses, and others, they may provide clean needles. Finally, myth 4, evidence-based models of treatment are the only way to include family members in their loved one's recovery. And the truth is that family involvement is a continuum, meaning that there are multiple roads that can lead to help and support. Effective evidence-based models of care is one way, such as those offered by the Firetree family of programs. But family engagement and support can also look like families scheduling initial visits, encouraging involvement in other outside community and social supports, or seeking out resources online. So this video is a short video that shows the difference between what is believed and what is true concerning family support for those in addiction and recovery. Maybe.
And has stopped socializing. He's doing everything he can for Jill. Driving her to appointments, taking on her household commitments, and removing as many stressors as possible to address this unexpected crisis. Bob constantly obsesses over Jill's cancer diagnosis. How might Bob's community, friends, family, and colleagues respond to his actions? Would they tell him to detach himself from Jill to take care of himself? Or that he lacks healthy boundaries and is living in denial? Would he be judged for his choices and accused of worsening Jill's condition? Probably not. Most people would empathize with his situation and admire his determination to do all he can for his wife and family. Now, let's imagine Jill recently experienced a relapse and started using alcohol and heroin. Bob can't leave his children with her because she's often intoxicated. He's taken on 2 jobs, quit exercising, shelved his hobbies, and has stopped socializing. Bob is driving her to appointments, taking on her household commitments, and removing as many stressors as possible to address this unexpected crisis. He finds himself constantly obsessing over Jill's alcohol and drug use. How might Bob's community, friends, family, and colleagues respond to his actions? Would they tell him to detach himself from Jill to take care of himself? Or that he lacks healthy boundaries and is living in denial? Would he be judged for his choices and accused of worsening Jill's condition? Probably. Bob may be told he has codependency, a decades-old myth that stigmatizes family members and their normal reactions to a loved one misusing substances. Kindness, support, and compassion help people change. It's entirely normal to do everything possible to help a loved one who's struggling. Yet these helping behaviors are often referred to as enabling, which discourages well-meaning family members from supporting their loved ones with addiction. When kindness and compassion are stigmatized, we are left with the impression that tough love facilitates change. But tough love, negative consequences, and withholding support is ineffective and opposes family members' natural instincts. Families are often told their loved ones need to hit rock bottom before they're ready to seek treatment. This idea is not only false, but dangerous. It encourages prolonged suffering and exacerbates a life-threatening health condition. Families are often encouraged to care for themselves instead of their loved ones with addiction, rather than being encouraged to care for themselves and their loved ones. Research has shown that family members can help both themselves and their loved ones. Family members need accurate information about the important role they can play in the recovery process.
So now we know what addiction is, what it looks like, how difficult it is to overcome, and how it is used to manipulate both the individual suffering the addiction and the family members who love them. And we talked about common myths regarding what people generally think help should and should not look like. So how do we support our loved one while still caring for ourselves, as they mentioned in the video? How do we know the difference between helping and enabling? At the heart of it all, what support should not look like is enabling. Enabling is when we bend over backwards to make sure something is possible or easier, or help someone avoid the natural consequences of their actions. In the end, we wind up exhausted, and the problem we intended to fix, correct, or make easier ends up being just as bad, if not worse. Some signs that you might be enabling a person are: you worry or feel highly anxious about what they are doing or not doing. You lie or make excuses for harmful behavior. You minimize or deny problems. You may routinely do things for them that they can do for themselves. Consistently put their needs before your own. You might feel guilty if you don't help. You feel anxious if you don't help or rescue. You feel responsible for their life choices and problems. You feel resentment towards your loved one because you're working harder than they are. And you may feel sorry for your loved one because they've had a hard life. And then finally, you may be afraid to let your loved one fail or to get in trouble. It can be hard to know if you're helping or enabling. A good rule of thumb is to support the recovery and not the addiction. Every action you take, hold it to this first test. If you're not sure if you should intervene, ask yourself, am I supporting his or her recovery, or is this something that he or she can handle as a grown adult? Letting someone experience their own natural consequences can be scary, but the alternative can be even worse, by perpetuating the addiction, or even worse, unwittingly contributing to your loved one's death. When you stop enabling, you're better able to give the individual who is addicted the tools that they need to succeed in life by teaching them the skills necessary to live a healthier life independently. You give them the power to make their own choices and to solve their own problems, including following through on effective addiction treatment programs and moving forward in their recovery. The best way to help an individual with a substance use disorder and ensure that you are not enabling them is to set up boundaries. You should set clear and measurable boundaries that are binding. Threatening to kick someone out or not pay a bill if you can't actually follow through with that is just a waste of everyone's time. If the person is working, whether they live on their own or at home, if you're paying any of their bills, unless it's clearly outlined in a budget, could be problematic. Any money you supply means they have more money for drugs and alcohol. If they are in a residential treatment, all their basic needs are being met, despite what they may tell you. Sometimes people are used to living more lavishly than they are given while they are in treatment. It's okay not to have every creature comfort answered. Watch what they do and not what they say. In other words, actions speak louder than words. Practice saying no. When the person who is addicted is your loved one, it is very difficult to refuse to continue enabling them. You must remain firm in your determination. They may get angry, but you will need to remain calm and make it clear that you are sticking to the boundaries and consequences that you've established. In addiction recovery, we say insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. If you try something 3 times and it does not work, it's time to try something different. Recovery from addiction is a process, and love often blinds families. Seek guidance and ask for help from those that you trust. Addiction recovery takes time, and it's easy for love to get in the way of clear decision making. Don't be afraid to ask for help or advice from people that you trust. Setting boundaries can be hard. You may be tired of repeating the same patterns over and over, but it can feel easier to give in than it is to say no and to hold the boundary. This is where self-care comes in. Self-care sometimes feels like a luxury or a self-indulgent. Who has time for a bubble bath when my loved one is struggling? It's not just about bubble baths. It's about taking care of yourself the way that you do for others. Oftentimes, we spend so much time caring for them, for our loved ones, that taking time to care for ourselves feels very selfish. If you've ever heard a safety demonstration when you fly, they tell you put your safety gear on before assisting others. This is because it is not possible to take care of anyone else if you are not taking care of yourself first. Your loved one may not recognize how their actions affect you and others around them, but we know that addiction impacts the entire family. Whether or not your loved one is willing to seek help, remember to take care of yourself. You can't control the actions. Sorry, I lost my place. You can't control the actions of your loved ones, but you can control how you treat yourself. And remember, you did not cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. But what you can do is take care of yourself. Al-Anon teaches that self-care is not selfish. It is necessary to remain being all that we need to be for both ourselves and our loved ones. Self-care is understanding that we cannot prevent our loved ones from using or drinking. It is knowing that we can't will them to be sober and clean. And it is focusing on us and finding ways of creating healthier selves. There are many ways of practicing self-care. Here are some things to consider. Take a step back and give yourself time to think. Spend time alone. Forgive yourself. We are our own toughest critics and generally have higher expectations of ourselves than others. Put yourself first. Say no. No is a full sentence. It does not require an explanation. Eat a balanced diet. Get a full night's sleep. Practice meditation or yoga, mindfulness exercises, or another form of exercise that you enjoy. Journal. Free writing can be very powerful. You don't need to know what you want to say. Just start writing and see what happens. Take that bubble bath that we talked about a few slides back, or maybe listen to music. Remind yourself that just for today, I will focus on what I can control and let go of what I can't. I will be thankful. I will focus on one thing at a time. I will take time for myself. I will accept myself for who I am right now. I will not give up. I will accept my feelings and I will celebrate each step forward. None of this is a perfect science. All we can do is try our best. In recovery, we strive for practice, not perfection. Ask for help. We don't have all the answers. Asking for help is not a weakness. There is no manual on how to do life and no one right way, despite what we may have been taught or led to believe. If you need help for yourself or for your loved ones, there are many resources. In addition to Firetree, your local county drug and alcohol authority is able to help find treatment for their addictions. Outpatient group therapy, which is typically a step down after an individual completes inpatient treatment, aka residential treatment, is a form of group therapy focusing on specific recovery and lifestyle topics. Individual therapy is very helpful for both those in recovery as well as caregivers or loved ones. Family-based therapists meet with the entire family or whichever ones of those that are either willing or appropriate to help mend relationships. There are also recovery and peer support specialists that work one-on-one with both individuals in recovery and family members of substance users. A third option is called a certified peer support specialist, which helps individuals with mental illness. All of these specialty types are individuals with lived experience who provide support to those currently navigating their own circumstances. Finally, there are self-help support groups such as the Family of 12-Step programs, Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, which of course are meant for the alcoholics or addicts in our lives, as well as Al-Anon and Nar-Anon, which are support groups for the family members of alcoholics or addicts. There are also lesser-known support groups called Smart Recovery and Celebrate Recovery. Smart Recovery stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training. It is a science-informed approach for problematic and addictive behaviors. Celebrate Recovery is a Christian-based program to help achieve long-lasting recovery. They offer several types of groups for both individuals in recovery, their families and individuals, and they also provide services and groups for all manner of other mental health or other behavioral issues, or just plain need for support. You can find information about all or any of these resources via the internet or in a Google search for your area, and many of the above listed support groups have apps as well. So thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you've learned something that is beneficial for yourself and the loved ones and your recovery journeys. The final slide has a list of resources used in this presentation if you would like additional information. Unless anybody has any questions, our next session is July 15th at 12 o'clock, where our staff member Chelsea Clark will be discussing the importance of life skills in recovery. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, and if not, I thank you very much for your time, and I hope that we get to see you again. Thank you.